Good morning and welcome to NJRHA Educational Webinar on paid sick leave. We have asked Dennis J. Alessi from Mandelbaum Salzburg to join us. He is an expert in employment law and healthcare law. Good morning. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you.
You can tell our group a little more about you if you like.
Oh, okay. Well, we've been counsel to the New Jersey, my partner, Gary Young, our firm's been counsel to the New Jersey Restaurant Association, 20 years, maybe longer. And so, we've got a lot of familiarity with the restaurant industry. And we're, a full service law firm, not only to the restaurant industry, but basically across the board. So anything you need, whether it's purchase, sale, real estate issues, zoning issues, buying the property, whatever, any litigation, hopefully you don't have to get into any litigation, any of those issues, we're certainly able to represent you, and we certainly understand the industry because we've been representing you guys for so long. Also, anything on a personal level, your estate planning, divorce, hopefully none of you have to go through that, but your estate planning, your divorce, any other personal issues like that are also all things that where we have attorneys specializing that we can represent you. What I've been spending a lot of time doing the last 5 or 6 months is counseling our clients, including obviously a lot of our clients that own restaurants, on all of the issues related to the pandemic in relation to employment laws and how they affect your business. So one of the things we're going to talk about today, I know the topic was paid sick leave, but I'm really going to talk more broadly about issues that you need to address with your staff, because now we're into a very different situation than we were when I gave a first presentation, I think back in April, I believe, because now you're all open, at least to some extent. And what we see happening is I get more and more phone calls every week from clients saying, oh, okay, one of my employees has tested positive. What do I do? So what I want to talk about is in that context. You're open. You got some of your staff there. How do we deal with the problems that are now coming up? Because now we've got, a greater infection rates. And what I'm also going to do, I'm going to talk about it in a very general sense. I'm not going to sit here and go, okay, this leave says this and that leave provides, because, I can't keep awake when I do that. And I'm sure you couldn't. And it's not going to do any good because you're never going to remember it. So I'm going to talk more generically, and then not to put a plug in for lawyers, but when you get a specific situation with staff and you want to know what to do, you just seriously call us. 2 weeks ago, I got a text message, literally 10:10 on Sunday night from a client. One of my staff just called, says she just tested, she got her results back, tested positive. We're opening tomorrow morning. And what do I do? So in those situations, it's very fact specific as to what you have to do. So it really is a situation where you need to call your attorneys and ask them what to do from an employment perspective.
And that's one of the reasons why we promoted you all up to panelists. Some of you have very specific questions, and it's better that you ask Dennis directly your specific question opposed to having to type it. And so you can basically touch him and get a real answer before you get off the webinar.
So what I'd like to do, as I said earlier, is really talk at a very broad-based level. And then so you have a general idea of what to do no matter what situation comes up, and then answer some specific questions. So there are a myriad of different situations that you can now face with your staff. Staff person tests positive. Staff person has symptoms. Maybe they come to work and they've got symptoms, which is not a good idea. Staff persons come in close contact with someone who's tested positive. Staff persons come in close contact with someone who has the symptoms. Staff person just traveled outside of the state and went to Florida for whatever ridiculous reason and has just come back. Staff person has someone at home who's tested positive or has symptoms, and they need to stay home to take care of them. Or their kids now with the schools pretty much closing down and having to stay home. These are all, and I don't think I was all inclusive there, but a pretty good panoply of the kinds of situations that'll come up where staff will come to you and say, like, I can't come to work right now, and perhaps for a while. And so, how do you deal with that? Well, first of all, you have to keep in mind that in all those situations, those employees are protected by a whole bunch of different laws. So you can't just say, "Oh, sorry about that, goodbye." And I'm sure you're all using a much smaller number of your staff than you were before. So I'll just call somebody else and bring them in. Sorry, I need I need somebody tonight. That's goodbye, and go bring somebody else in. You can certainly bring somebody else in to cover for them, but you just can't dismiss them because they are protected by all these laws, by the general law, employment laws that are in place, but also by the specific COVID laws, and the protections are quite significant in the sense that it's almost automatic. Once they fall into one of those categories, then they're protected by the law. So what you need to look at is, all right, what can I do to minimize the situation? In other words, what do I do to try to minimize the disruption to my business, my restaurant, while at the same time giving the employee the rights that they have under these different statutes? And that's the balancing act back and forth that you kind of have to do. So one thing you have to keep in mind is that there's, I'm up to 6, 7, 8. I think there's 8 different laws, both general employment laws and specific laws passed for COVID that all apply in any of those situations that I ticked off for you a minute ago. I think I had 8 or 9 different ones. There's 6 or 7 laws that would apply. And, you're not going to keep all those straight. You just want to keep in mind that there are overlapping laws. That's why I'm saying when you have that situation, you call your attorney and figure out how to deal with it. But the thing to keep in mind is that employees can't double dip, meaning that they can't take advantage of multiple leaves at the same time. They can only take one at a time. Now, in some situations, they're able to piggyback them, meaning they can take one, and if they continue to be in the protected category, they're still sick, they still need to be quarantined, their kid's still home from school, they may be able to take one leave and tack it on to the end of the other leave, which of course aggravates employers to no end, and extend it out. That they may be able to do. But in no situation that I can think of are they able to put one on top of the other and take 2 at the same time. So that's the first thing. Next thing you want to consider is, so the person's entitled to be out in any one of those situations I described. How do I deal with it that they're entitled to be on leave? How do I deal with it in a way that, first of all, minimizes the impact on my business? All right. So impact on the business. What you have to look at is, what was the situation with that employee when they were at work? And that's why complying with the guidelines, the CDC guidelines, the guidelines put out by the Department of Health, making sure that your staff is complying with the guidelines is extremely important to you being able to minimize the impact on your restaurant when one employee calls up and says, I just tested positive. And the reason why is this, is if your staff is wearing the masks, washing their hands, wearing a smock that they can, a paper smock that they can change, if they're following all the PPP guidelines, making sure that the tables are far enough apart, making sure that you've got a situation in the bathrooms where it's only one person at a time going in. Doing all of those things, maybe having your managers checking on that's going on, very important. Because if one employee calls in and they've tested positive, if you can talk to your managers and you're satisfied that everything, all those requirements were followed, then you're probably going to be in a situation where you can say to that one person, all right, you're going to stay out, but it's not going to affect your other employees. because remember what the standard is. Someone has to be in close contact, meaning less than 6 feet, for a minimum of 15 minutes, and the two parties are unmasked. So if you can confirm with your managers that in fact everybody's been following the protocols, and we haven't had that situation, then you're fine. That one person's out, everybody else comes back to work. Now, what you may want to do, because there's no way that staff are not going to know that so-and-so, wait staff or kitchen help or whatnot tested positive in their home. You know they're going to find out about it. You don't want them finding out about it through the grapevine, because then everybody goes freaking nuts about it. You want to be up front. All right. And in doing that, keep in mind that the person who's out does have a right to privacy. Now, if everybody already knows who it is, that's fine. But you, as the owner of the restaurant, shouldn't be saying who it is. Just say, look, one of the staff is out, and this is what we're going to do. So as I said earlier, if one staff person's out, you followed all the guidelines, everybody can come to work, but they're probably going to know that a staff person's out because they tested positive. So then you can decide, you don't have to, but you can decide at that point, do you want to have the rest of your staff tested? In most situations, most employers will have their staff go out and have their staff tested, even though the likelihood that anybody got infected at work is quite low. And the reason why they do that is, first of all, because they're concerned about their staff, but second of all, because you want the staff to have a sense of security. It's safe to go to work. Otherwise, if they think it's not safe, a lot of them are not going to come to work. So in that situation,
Dennis, I have a question. So let's say that employee calls you up and says they tested positive. In terms of paid sick leave, what does the employer have to do?
I'll get to that next.
Okay.
First, I wanted to talk about how do you minimize the impact on your business. Then we'll talk about what you have to do with that staff person. Now, let's go to the other situation. What I usually find happens is everybody's very good. They're on their best behavior. They're following all the rules when they're out on the floor, when they're out taking care of patrons. But what we find where things break down is when they're back in the kitchen. That's where the masks come off. Everybody's yakking. They're all in close quarters, or they're taking a break and they're in the back and everybody's together in the break room, with their masks off close together, perhaps having something to eat themselves when it's their break. That's the area where you must be most vigilant with your managers to be sure that those infection control protocols are followed in those areas. Because I have found from clients calling me, that's where things break, that's where the situation breaks down. So if you have that, and I had one client and there was nothing we could do about it, where we found out that half a dozen staff were all in the break room together, masks off, having lunch. So they were there for a half hour. Well, now all those people were in close contact. So in that situation, we had to send them all out to be tested, and there was some question whether or not some of them had some symptoms, and so they had to stay out for 4 or 5 days until until they were tested and got the results, and we could determine to have them come back in. So now
how do they have to pay those 5 people?
Pardon?
The New Jersey paid sick leave or the family leave?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in a second. Let me just keep
sorry.
how you're trying to minimize.
I apologize.
No, it's okay.
Some of them have already been through the weeds with the coronavirus and having employees with it. They're just trying to figure out how to pay them.
Right. Okay. So I'm just saying that. The first thing I would look at as the employer is, how do I minimize the impact on my business? And that's what I suggest you do. Now we'll go back to the employee and say, how do I deal with the employee? Well, here's the thing. Almost any situation, that employee is going to be entitled to unemployment benefits. So if we look at our friends from Department of Labor, if they're home because they've tested positive and they're quarantined, if they're home because they have symptoms, if they're home because their kid is home from school, if they're home because they must care for a family member who is diagnosed or is in isolation. In all of those situations, those employees are going to be eligible for unemployment. In others of those situations, they're going to be entitled to the New Jersey Family Leave Insurance. So the first thing you want to do, if it's the employee themselves, you want to say to them, go try and see if you can obtain unemployment. Why? Because of course, ultimately you pay for it with the tax that's going to go up next year for unemployment. But you try that first, because in that situation, it's not something that you're paying. If it's a situation with a family member that they have to take care of, then you tell them, look, go and apply for New Jersey Family Leave Insurance. That's the other portion of unemployment that they may be entitled to. If they're sick themselves and can't work, then they may be entitled to unemployment disability. So you've got three different state programs, all under the rubric of unemployment. There's standard unemployment, unemployment disability, and family leave insurance, which is another part of unemployment. There's almost none of those 8 or 9 examples I gave at the beginning that wouldn't fit under one of those three. And so I always tell my clients, tell them to go apply for one of those benefits first. All right, that's the first thing. Next is let me stick with this for a minute though. I have to say though that state of New Jersey is getting a little hip now, because I've had a couple of situations this past week where clients contacted me and said, Dan, we took your advice. We told them to apply unemployment. Unemployment came back and said, no, go get your family, Family First Coronavirus Response Act leave from your employer. So our first line of defense is go apply to the Department of Labor for those unemployment benefits. If they come back, the Department of Labor says, no, you've got other benefits that you can tap into with your employer. Go get those. Then we got to go to Plan B. And what are those? Okay. Those are the benefits provided under the first Coronavirus Relief Act. Now, that's let me talk about what the two of those are. First, it's if they're sick or they have symptoms or they're required to be quarantined, then they can come under the sick leave provision of the Coronavirus Relief Act. What that says is they get up to 80 hours of paid time to be home. All right. And that's 80 hours that you have to pay for. The maximum benefit is $511 a day. I assume you probably don't have so many people working for you that are making $511 a day or more. So it's whatever they get paid for the day up to that maximum. And you do have to pay them up to that 10 days, 80 hours. But you get a tax refund really for your payroll tax. So for every dollar that you have to put out to pay that person to be out, through filing for your payroll tax, you actually can get a refund. The government will instead, it's not, they say that it's a credit. It really isn't. The way it works, and you deal with that with your accountant, quite frankly, is that you're actually going to get a check back from the feds related to your payroll tax for every dollar that you spent. But you do have to put it out in the first place. So that's the first one that they can take benefit from. So your first level, as I said, was unemployment, where it doesn't cost you anything. Your second level now are these Coronavirus Relief Act benefits, because there you do have to put out the money, but at least you're going to get it back. I haven't talked to any accounts to find out how quickly you get it back, but you will. The second Relief Act benefit that they're entitled to is the family leave. This is up to 12 weeks of family leave if their kids have to be home from school. And there, the maximum benefit is $211 a day. So I think a lot of your employees probably will hit that number. So there, you got to put out $211 a day for every day that your staff person has to stay home because their kid is out of school because school is all being done remotely. Again, it's the same thing. You're going to get it back, but you got to front it. However, there's a couple little nuances to that. I said I wouldn't get into nuances, but there are a couple of important nuances that
Dennis, before we go into the nuances, we have a couple questions.
Oh, go ahead. Okay.
That are live. Jeannie Cotella has one. If you want to unmute yourself.
Go ahead, Jeannie. Go ahead. What's the question?
Oh, wait, Jeannie, one moment. I muted you by accident. There you go.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you, Dennis. So I had a question, and then it sounds as if you started to answer part of it. But with an employee who you mentioned, our first recourse should be to tell someone they need to file for unemployment. But then you just said how if an employee is sick, they are eligible for the Coronavirus Relief Act. So, I mean, do we still want to ask employees, to file for unemployment?
Yes. That's what I started out saying. In any one, I ticked off for you all the different situations in which someone can either be entitled to unemployment benefits, unemployment disability, or family leave insurance unemployment. So in all situations, I would say first tell them to go apply for one of those unemployment benefits, which either one, whatever one would apply to their situation. Tell them to go do that first.
But now, how does that? What kind of light does that put on us as the employer? If then they say, because I had one employee who said, I don't want to use my sick time. I want to get paid. Like she knew she wanted to get paid under this Relief Act. So if I was to tell her to, start out with unemployment, is that, I'm assuming it's legal for me to request that, right? To make that request.
That's what I was saying earlier, is like, it said to the employee, well, try that first, see if you can get it under that. And if you can't, then come back to me. I don't see any problem with that. You're not denying the person. Now, of course, you're not denying the person the benefit. You're saying, go see if you can get this benefit first. If not, then come back. However, you make a good point. If you've got an employee who's kind of hip and knows that benefit's out there and comes to you first and says, I want to take advantage of that benefit, and they qualify for it, then in that situation, I think you're kind of stuck and you just got to provide them with that benefit.
I have one other, this is the one employee that I'm kind of really having a tough time with. This is someone who worked at our office. She worked, she's been working throughout, from March right through. She's getting partial unemployment, and she's been getting typically 20 to 25 hours a week, obviously, on the book. So unemployment knows that she's working part-time. She had been working remotely. We made a decision that it was not at all effective for us to have her working remotely. We told her that and told her that we needed her to come back to the office to continue working. She set up a date that she would start, and the day before her start date, she told us she tested positive for coronavirus. So she obviously could not come to work. And then she very quickly said, I want to make sure that I'm entitled to my 80 hours under, this Relief Act. She wasn't working 80 hours, so we told her, she'd only be eligible for the hours that she worked over a normal 2-week period. And over the last 8 months, that was about, 25 hours a week. So now what happens when I finish? When she gets paid for those hours, can she then ask for, like you mentioned earlier, can she put then her sick time and say, now I'm not yet ready to come back to work, because she was supposed to come back to work next week or Monday. And she told us that she has, still lasting effects from the virus, and there's no way that she's going to be able to be 100%. And so what do I do moving forward? So now am I paying sick time?
Okay. All right. let me do this. So I'm trying to present this in some kind of logical order while answering your question at the same time. Let me go back to something you said a moment ago. Everybody's entitled to the 80 hours by the statute. And I had a client who was kind of confused about this the other day. If somebody's only working 20 hours a week, then yes, you only pay them for 20 hours for the week that they're out. But they can continue to get 20 hours of pay for 4 weeks till it equals 80.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I kind of thought the way you said that. Yes.
I had no idea.
No,
it was HR manager was the one who said they're only entitled to 2 weeks of their normal hours.
No, they don't get paid for time that they would otherwise not be working. But if they're working 2 days a week and they're entitled to essentially 10 days, then they can be out, assuming that they qualify for the benefit, obviously, assuming that they're sick. They can get paid for 2 days a week for 5 weeks till they hit the 10 days, 80 hours. Oh, absolutely. So I kind of thought the way you said that. Yeah. Now, so let me get to your next question. But I wanted to just make the overview point so everyone understands that. We talked about our first tier. Your second tier then are these benefits under the Relief Act because you get reimbursed. And then the third tier is when are you on the hook? And that's what you were getting to. Now, when are you on the hook? So now we get to level 3. You're on the hook in 2 situations. When I mean on the hook, I use the vernacular, meaning where it's actually coming out of your pocket,
right?
And nobody's giving it back to you. All right. So that's 2 situations. First is the earned sick leave, the New Jersey State earned sick leave. So that's the 1 hour paid sick leave for every 30 hours worked. And I'm hoping everybody's doing it on an accrual basis. In other words, they got to work the 30 hours, pile it up and whatnot. So with that, you cannot say to them, to your employees, okay, you're not going to be out on coronavirus relief 10-day sick leave. I'm going to count the 5 days, the 40 hours of New Jersey earned sick leave. So you're going to be out on both at the same time. As I said at the beginning, you can't do that. They can do it sequentially, one after the other. So now again, I'm assuming that they're qualified, that they're still sick. So if they finish their 10 days of coronavirus relief pay, their 80 hours, then they can take their 40 hours of New Jersey earned sick leave, which comes out of your pocket, if they're still if they're still qualifying for the benefit because they're still sick, and 2, assuming that they've worked, good then what 30 times 40, 1,200, 30 hours, 12, that they've worked enough hours that they've got the 40 hours accrued. So now we're down to tier 3, which is where it's on you. One thing I would say also to you is, I've had some employers call me and say, I'm not so sure that the person's that they really tested positive. How do I know? You can require them. You can say, well, no, I got to see the test result. You got to show it to me. So you can require verification of that to be sure that they really are. So now we're down to the third tier. Now we get to the next part of that third tier is the paid sick days and vacation time, the PTO time that you've provided under your personal policy manual. The problem with that is that DOL, Department of Labor, Federal Department of Labor, way at the beginning said that all of these benefits, all the relief benefits, or the benefits, and the state says the benefits provided by the state, are in addition to whatever you have under your personal policy manual.
Right.
So what we began doing, and is Gary here? Yeah, Gary knows. What we began doing was rushing around with all of our clients to change their leave policies in their manuals to account for that. But you can't do it retroactively. So if you have someone who's been out on the coronavirus relief leave, 8 days, and then they want to take their PTO time. If it's for sick leave, that's under your manual. That is, it is a vested benefit. If they've accrued it, they're entitled to it. But here again, you're entitled to say to that person, I need some verification that you're still feeling the symptoms. I got a doctor's note, whatever. But let me say one thing. That is for the sick leave portion. Our position is if they want to take the time and it's really, really vacation time, our position is the employer always has the right to say no to vacation. So if they just want to take that time because I just got over it, I'm feeling better, I need a couple of days of R&R, so I want to take some of my vacation time. In that situation, you can say no. We take the position that the employer can always say no to vacation time. So that's how you can minimize it. And then the next thing that you want to do is you want to change the leave policy in your manual to make the points that they can't string it out one on top of the other. Is that okay? Thank you.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.
Let me say just, and then we'll go to questions. But I see the time's running. One thing about employees having to stay home with their kids, because I can see it shaping up already. January, February, March, these kids are all going to be home. Is there are a couple of nuances to that, as I started to say earlier, which can be an out for you, and those actually there's three, and Jeannie mentioned one. First, if you can arrange for the employee to work at home, then they're not entitled to the leave. Now I know in a restaurant that's only your back office people, maintaining your books and records, but you got that. Secondly, if the school has given the parents an option, so you have to see what the local school board said. If the option is, look, the kids can come 2 days a week, or they can stay home all 5 days. If the employee takes the option to keep their kids home all 5 days, but they don't have to, then you don't have to give them the paid leave for those other 2 days, because that was their option to keep their kids home. They could have sent the kid to school for those 2 days. And the third nuance to that is, and this is tough because, how much are you permitted to pry into your employee's personal life? If they've got somebody else at home, like we had a situation where the guy was the husband was an accountant and he's been working at home for the last 20 years. It's like, no, wait a minute. You got somebody else at home I know that take care of those kids. You have to come in. In that situation, also, you can deny the leave. So there are certain situations, because that's the big nut. That's 12 weeks. So you're looking at January, February, March. You can have somebody out for that entire period of time. January, March into April. Yeah, you can have somebody out for 3 months, and you're paying them, even though you're getting it back. You're still paying them. So that's why I wanted to get in, at least there, into some nuances of how can you get out of, for want of a better term, get out of jail cards with that. So that's sort of an overview of leave and how you would deal with that. And I guess if it's all right, we'll spend the rest of the time answering questions.
So Craig has a question, but I need you to unmute, because I believe your question came at a point that Dennis was making at that time. Yeah, no,
it was answered. Thank you, Shah.
Okay.
Oh, good. I'm glad I answered it. Okay.
Now, what does it mean for the FFCRA that's expiring December 31st? What does that mean to everyone? Can you tell us what that means?
That means that assuming Congress doesn't extend it, and I should have made that point earlier about January, February, March, assuming that Congress doesn't extend it, those benefits end December 31st. So I was asked the other day, what do we do if somebody's already out on that benefit? They're already out on it. What do I do for December 31st? I would say to you that I would end the benefit on December 31st, because I suspect that if you take the position that, well, they're in the middle of the benefit, so I got to continue it after December 31st, you put in for a credit refund on your payroll tax, and it's for a day after December 31st. I suspect that Department of Labor, this is the feds now, are not going to give you that. Not going to give that money back. So what I would say to staff is if you've got staff that are are taking advantage of those two benefits, and it's going to extend beyond December 31st, I would advise them in advance and say, it ends on December 31st. And then I would advise them to then go back and apply for unemployment. Because in that situation, now that benefit's ended, it's more likely that they'll be able to get unemployment.
I think that the association, we're going to need to reach out to Gary and you on how we should explain that to our member base, because that's important. Everyone's not on here naturally, but I think that's important information for them to know if they have people out on this FFCRA, right, that it ends on December 31st. And if there's nothing extended via Congress, then they need to end it and I guess send their employees on unemployment. Okay.
Right.
I need the language for that. I have no idea. I mean, I understand it, but
right.
I'm sure we can prepare some kind of memo that you could post or send to your members.
Right.
Yes, please.
Now, keep in mind, there's nowhere does it say that. That's just
right. But that's just to cover them.
Yeah, that's what will happen. One other important point: when someone calls and says, I tested positive, or not tested, I've tested positive, or I've come in close contact, or I have the symptoms and whatnot. A good thing you can do is call your local board of health, go over the facts with them, and have them confirm, yes, that person should quarantine, and then document that, or try to get even an email from the Department of Health, because in some of these situations, the entitlement to unemployment benefits is if they're quarantined as the result of a directive by a public health agency or their private physician. So if you do that, you enhance the prospect that they'll be able to get unemployment where it's not a cost to you.
I had a question. I had a question emailed to me. I don't think they're on a webinar. We take a tip credit, so our servers make $3.13 per hour plus tips. Is it correct to pay server minimum wage when they call out sick?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Let me jump in on that one, Shaw.
Yeah, go ahead, Gary. Thank you, Gary.
The answer is that the employees who are tipped employees are minimum wage. They're minimum wage workers. Okay. The tips are accredited against the minimum wage. If they're not getting tips, then the employer is obliged to pay them the minimum wage. That's the minimum. Okay. In all instances.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I mean, yes, towards the $2.11 a day that you have to pay them. How do you figure the daily rate? Okay, thank you, Gary. That wasn't to help with that. All right, so go ahead. Anybody else have any other questions on?
If anyone has questions, this is an interactive webinar. I promoted everyone up to panelists. You can unmute yourself if you choose to and ask your question.
You go ahead.
When we pay that paid leave as a result of the coronavirus and people being out, how do we go for that quote unquote refund or tax credit? Where does that?
Well, you do that through payroll tax, and quite frankly, you deal with that with your accountant. The mechanics of how you deal with that, really talk to your accountant about that.
So I think I'm unmuted. So is that credit taken at the end of the year or at the end of the pay period that you would be paying for those benefits?
Honestly, I can't tell you. I don't know the mechanics of it. One thing I do know is that DOL put out a statement a long time ago and said they're not going to treat it like a real credit where you got to wait till the end of the year and you take the credit on that as you can apply for those funds that you've spent, and that they'll actually give you a refund, and it's even more than a refund because a refund for the amount that you've spent. So you don't have to wait till year end. But again, the mechanics of it, I haven't now dealt with that because I leave that to the accountants. That's their ability. So I would talk to your accountant, but you do not have to wait till the end of the year to try to get the tax benefit of that.
Shaw, that may be something that we should kind of also, once we find out, circulate to the members.
Is there any program that we may have participated in, like funds that we took, like the PPP or something like that, that would negatively affect our ability to take the credit?
So Ryan, your question sounds more like an accountant question, which we have a webinar. I'm just doing a plug now. We have a webinar on the PPP next Tuesday at 10 a.m. With them.
Okay.
It's a very interactive webinar like this one. And they take questions directly. If you email me, I can ask them the question during the webinar or prior to the webinar, or you can jump on as well and join the webinar. And it's an excellent webinar. They're really good about answering your PPP questions.
One thing I would never try to step on it when it comes to the PPP loans. But one thing I will tell you on that is that if someone's out because they're out, either they've got the virus or for whatever reason, that's not going to affect your forgiveness in terms of your staff, that how much of your staff you've brought back, because that person is still employed by you. They're simply out on leave. So I will tell you, from that perspective, if someone's out on coronavirus relief leave, either one of those, I'm pretty certain that that's not going to affect your ability to forgiveness, because those people are still your active employees.
Thank you.
Okay. Did that answer your question, Ryan? Because you still can join the PPP webinar.
Yeah, I know. I still will.
Please. No, I'm not trying.
No. If you answered his question, that's great. I just want to make sure his answers get,
I'm not a substitute.
Answered, that's all. I don't care who answers it, as long as it gets answered and we do what we need to do. I'm certainly not a substitute for the crew from Witham, who I've dealt with many times, and they're quite capable people. But that one question I happen to know the answer to. But do attend there, because the PPP loan is really complicated on the forgiveness piece of it.
Yep. Yeah. No. Thank you.
Again, anyone have any questions for Dennis? He's an expert in this employment law, and Gary chimes in every now and then. He's
Thank
an
you, Gary.
expert as well.
I defer to Dennis because he has greater expertise in this area.
If you're chiming in from your phone, you just *6 to unmute yourself.
Gary, you were going to say something?
No, I was just saying that you're more knowledgeable in this area than I. That's exactly why you're the speaker today.
Okay, thank you.
Well, it doesn't appear.
Shaw, this is Babish. Really quick for Dennis and Gary. I know you're going to get back to us with a few of the answers to some of our questions, but is there a way you guys can maybe just create a brief white paper summary on this that we can share with our members?
Yeah, they are.
Oh, they are. Okay.
Yeah. I asked because I don't know how to explain any of that. Thank you very much for chiming in on that, Babish. And I don't know.
So let me do this, because we're getting close to the end of time, and actually I've another Zoom starting at 11 o'clock. I just want to go to a different topic that I think you all should consider, and that is, the vaccine is going to be coming out, and as that gets more widely circulated, I'm sure I would assume that even our gov will start reducing the restrictions on you. And the thing that you have to consider is, are you going to mandate your employees being vaccinated? Us employment lawyers have been bantering that about. There's no guidance right now, but the general consensus is, and I won't go into analysis, but the general consensus is that an employer, particularly in your industry, hospitality, probably can require that their employees get vaccinated as a condition of really continuing to work. There are two caveats to that I would state to you. One is, if someone comes up and says they have a religious problem with that, They're probably going to be exempt. And there you kind of have to be careful with that. You're not permitted to probe too deeply into that. Like, well, what sect do you belong to? And let me have a letter from your minister that says that your religious group has a religious problem with vaccination. Yeah, now we had some client that got in big trouble for insisting on that. About the only thing you can do is ask them to just put it in writing to they have a religious conviction. So we believe right now that will be an exemption, but we'll have to see. The second group that will probably be exempted will be those who have severe allergies, and therefore it's medically not recommended that they get the vaccination. But there again, you're entitled to documentation. So what I'm recommending to clients now is I would decide that now. What approach do you want to take? And if that's what you're going to do, sooner rather than later, I mean, maybe early January, is put that out to your employees that, we are going to require vaccination. And if anybody's got a problem with that, they need to speak to us about that and make sure it's spoken to on a one-on-one basis, because if they're talking about a religious issue, well, that you want to keep confidential. But clearly, if they're going to talk about a medical issue, because when you're talking about a medical issue, that's a disability. Now you have to engage in the interactive process with your employee back and forth. That's going to take you some time. You're going to want medical documentation. If you think it's all garbage, under the ADA, you have a right to have your own physician make that determination or get outside opinion. So I would say to you that even though we're a couple of months away, if you decide you want to do that, I would put that out to your employees in January and then start dealing on an individual basis with those who object on one of those two bases. If they're just saying like, I don't believe in vaccination, I think in that situation that you can require it. If they don't have a medical reason or a religious reason, they can require them to do it. But hopefully we'll get a little more guidance on that. I don't want anybody here to be a test case, in court. So
that's a great subject that you brought up, Dennis. We had this discussion in our company last week, and we were discussing whether it can be mandatory. Is it legally our right to ask our employees to get vaccinated? And if they don't, then what do we do? But based on the two exemptions that you mentioned, I understand that.
Right.
But again, what if I'll take it a step further and say, okay, what about guests coming into our hotels or restaurants? Just like the airline industry can go in and say, hey, you want to board our plane? You got to show us a vaccination card. That's the only way to board our plane. So what do you do at that time?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that one. I'll have to think about that. We don't allow anybody in our restaurant who can't show a vaccination card.
I mean, it's up to the discretion of the restaurant and hotels.
Well,
again, airline might mandate it. So what do you do here then?
Well, the problem is you're open to the public, as opposed to the airlines can control the people within the airplane. It's their permit, but you're open to the public. So I don't know. Let me go back to the employee for a minute. I'm going to put Gary on the spot. So with the employees, the reason why I say that I think you can mandate it is because either DOL or EEOC, I forget which, came out at the beginning and said an employer can mandate employees getting tested. You can require your employees to get tested. And they said the reason why is because you've got an obligation to make sure that employee is safe at work. You've got an obligation to make sure your other employees are safe at work, and you're dealing with a pandemic. And you, being in the hospitality business, also have some of an obligation to make sure that your patrons are safe. So I look at that and say, okay, if on that basis, the government's already told me I can order my employees to be tested. I think that same rationale could be used to say, now I can order my employees to be vaccinated. And if they refuse, you say, look, you can't come to work until you get vaccinated. So that's my rationale for that. As for patrons, you have my thought. You're open to the public, so I don't know. But Gary, I don't want to put you on the spot, Gary.
Well, Dennis, I basically agree. But ultimately, that when it comes to employees, we have greater discretion and control over this. As to the people, the public and public accommodation,
right.
I think your instincts are correct on that, and at least to raise that issue. Ultimately, These are new issues for us as a society. These are new legal issues. And we're going to get guidance from various agencies, I would hope, sooner than later. Whether they're right or wrong, that might be decided in a court. We don't want necessarily one of our members being the guinea pig in that instance, because it's going to be an expensive lesson. However, I think as time goes on, what the members of the association can anticipate is that we will try to stay ahead of the curve, or at least on the cutting edge of the curve, in terms of how to deal with these things. And we will also have to look to agencies, the government, to guide us in terms of what's acceptable and what's not.
Yeah.
So one last question. Is there some kind of language that we should put in our employee handbook? Because some are changing employee handbook because it's the end of the year, and creating a new or upgraded employee handbook regarding to testing. Should we change some language, or is there proper language that we can put in there as far as testing is concerned for employees? Or should we wait until we know what definition is going to come out by?
Well, are you talking about vaccination now, or?
Yes, vaccination, Gary.
Yeah, I think that, again, it's too soon to tell.
Yeah.
I do think that this is a very fluid situation.
Right.
And first and foremost, the vaccine, I don't think as of right now is officially sanctioned. I think it's imminent. But and then, of course, there's going to be a whole pecking order of access to vaccination. I think this will give us enough time to sort this out in the next 30 to 45 days would be my guess. All I can say to you is we will try to stay on top of this. And if, in fact, we come to conclusions in terms of what's advisable, recommendable, we'll advise you. At the same time, perhaps, especially since this is cutting edge and brand new, it'd probably be wise not to be putting anything in a handbook yet.
Yeah.
We'll do it by policy.
Right.
We can make an announcement to our employees. And ultimately, if it becomes settled, then we can incorporate that as a policy in the handbook.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
And I agree. That's what I say. I wouldn't go putting anything in the handbook right now. And
Yeah.
because it's going to be ad hoc. 4 or 5 months from now, once everybody's vaccinated, it's going to be old news. So yeah, you would just adopt a policy. But I agree with Gary. You should wait and let's see what kind of guidance we get from the government. So
Yeah, I've seen conflicting guidance already from different governmental agencies. The EEOC is already throwing some, a wet blanket over everybody, while the OSHA, for example, is saying that, you can protect your
Right.
fellow employees from these dangers. So look, this is typical. We're going to get a lot of different opinions, and hopefully they'll settle into some kind of recognized view or approach to this.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay.
All right.
Any more questions? You can unmute yourself if you like. And if you're on your phone, it's *6. Okay.
Oh, good.
It doesn't look like we have any more questions at this time. Again, I want to thank you, Dennis. You did agree that you would come back in January if something changes with the FFCRA, and we can touch base on what that would mean to everyone in the industry. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a wonderful day.
Yes.
Thank you, Shaw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Gary will be coming on probably in the next couple of months to talk about the employee handbook. By the way.
For sure. But by the way, I just wanted to thank my partner for being such a good speaker. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you all.
You're
Yes.
welcome, Gary.
Again, thank you.
everybody.
Such
Bye-bye.
a knowledge.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.